This is a History of Western Thought number 10 on Plato and the Forms. In this video, we get to the point in our history of Western thought where we begin addressing the most significant philosopher in the Western world. It's been said by Alfred North Whitehead that the whole history of philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato. Now, this may sound like an exaggeration, but the majority of the rest of the discussion in the Western world is influenced in some way by the arguments set forth first by Plato. If you are watching this video and have not yet watched the previous ones, I would urge you to do so first because it gives you some context into what exactly Plato was talking about. Well, oftentimes when people are speaking about Western thought, they begin with Plato. Plato is addressing concerns that arise from earlier thinkers. So it's important to get a background as to what people were arguing prior to Plato in Greek philosophy before we get to the solutions to those problems that he himself was posing. Now, Plato was born in Athens, Greece around 428 BC, and he lived about 80 years. He was a student of Socrates, who is the philosopher that we discussed in the previous video. But unlike Socrates, Plato has a lot of writing. We only know Socrates largely from the writings of Plato, as well as a couple other sources. But Plato we know from his own writings, so we have a deeper understanding of Plato's thought than we do of any other philosopher we've discussed in our series so far. In this video, we are going to be addressing Plato's view of the forms, and in further videos on Plato, we'll be exploring some of the implications of that as well as Plato's ideas about various other topics. But what is the most central, or oftentimes the most famous part of Plato's philosophy is his notion of the forms, or the ideas. And what Plato sets forth is sometimes referred to as idealism, or the notion that that which is most real are ideas rather than the physical material world itself. Now, to understand why Plato comes to the conclusions he does, we need to understand and grapple with the questions that had guided earlier philosophers. Now, if you remember in the other videos, there are two main ideas that we discussed that drive a lot of the philosophical conversations prior to this. One of those is the nature of the connection between change and constancy in the world. We spoke about certain figures, such as Heraclitus, who argued that everything in the world is change. There were others, such as Zeno, who argued that there was no change, that change itself was just an illusion. Now, both of these ideas seem false, because in just regular ways of speaking about things, we can often speak about the same object being that object that it is, even as it undergoes different kinds of change. We do this as a child grows up. They retain their same identity, but their body changes, their mind changes. And so they are, as are all physical material objects, a mixture of both some kind of change and some kind of constancy. Now, if you remember the other idea that we discussed, which is prominent in trying to work out the nature of the world that we live in, is the connection between unity and multiplicity. Why is it, for example, that we can speak of children and identify multiple particular children as being of the same kind? Each of these children, whether boy or a girl or whatever different heights they may be, they each have the essence of what is a child. We refer to them as the same thing. But they are all very different. So how do we explain this idea that things are different in the world, but in some ways they are united to one another in the world? In other words, we can speak of various things as being of the same species, while as particulars they have many differences. Plato was trying to address both of these concerns, and in doing so, he came up with this idea of the forms. Now, this can be described in terms of what is probably Plato's most famous idea, which is what is known as the Allegory of the Cave. This allegory first appears in Plato's most famous work, the Republic. Now, in this work, Plato writes through the character of Socrates, though it is debatable whether Socrates himself had any real consistent idea of the forms, though Plato does seem to insinuate that he did get these ideas from his own teacher. But in this allegory, Plato describes life as a series of individuals who are in a cave. They are chained to that cave, and they have a fire behind them. Now, in front of them, they are watching shadows. The shadows are through the light of the fire and various objects moving around behind them. But the people who are chained in this cave only see the shadows. And so they believe that the shadows are actually reality. They think they are the thing that is real, and they don't know any different. And Plato describes the practice of philosophy as he sees it as the breaking of these chains. And as these chains are broken, the philosopher is able to break out of this cave and turn around, so that he is no longer looking at the shadows, but begins to look at the things themselves that cast those shadows, as he looks to the light and the objects as they are. Now, this allegory demonstrates how Plato views the realm of ideas versus the physical material world. So for Plato, the world that we live in is a world of change. It is also a world of particulars or individual things. And so like someone like Heraclitus, he recognizes the reality of change in the world. According to our sense perception, things are changing all the time. And again, according to our sense perception, we see particular things. There are many particular objects, for example, that may be the color red, but they are not, in essence, the very idea or essence of the color red itself. They just share in the color red, but they are particular objects. Now, Plato says that this is merely a shadow. The physical things we see in the material world are a shadow cast by the more perfect things, and the more perfect things are in the realm of ideas. And so we need to transcend beyond the physical boundaries of what we sense, what we taste, what we touch through our sense experience, and transcend in our mind to the ideal realm. And so what is really real is not just the particular objects that happen to share in the property of having the same appearance that looks like red, for example, but is instead the color red itself. There is the ideal form that is the most real thing. This is the thing that is casting the shadows that we often look to as the most real thing. And these things are also singular. So, for example, if we take something like a dog, we see multiple particulars of what dog is, multiple instantiations of dog in our lives. You may have multiple different dogs around you. Perhaps you own a couple that are different species. One may be male, one may be female. They may have very different temperaments. But Plato says that there is a unity even among these two dogs in that they both share in the same form. And there is this ideal form that is the idea of dog. Now, this is the perfect form of it. Now, the idea itself is perfect. Now, the physical instantiations of that form, or shadows or reflections of what that form is, are less perfect than the ideal. And they can be less perfect in multiple ways. One dog can be more similar to the ideal form of dog than another. So, for example, if a dog is missing a leg or it can't walk properly or it's sick, then it's not looking like or it's not sharing in the ideal form in the same way that a healthier dog might be. And so in this way, with this distinction between the realm of the forms and the physical objects, changing objects in the world, we have a way for Plato to account for two different realities. One reality is the world where things are united, and a world where things are unchanging. And on the other hand, there is the world of sense experience that we live in. And in this world of sense experience, we have particular, multiple objects. And we also have change throughout our world. And so in holding to these two realms, the realm of the ideas or the forms and this physical material world that we live in, Plato tried to answer what were seeming contradictions between the realities of life that we find in earlier philosophers. And so that is our basic introduction to Plato's idea of the forms. In further videos, we're going to be getting in more detail about what exactly that means and how it applies to various areas of life. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.